What does it take to restore some of the most iconic golf courses in America and bring them into the modern era without losing their soul? In this episode, Jon Schultz, CEO and founder of ezLocator, sits down with renowned golf course architect Andrew Green for an in-depth conversation on the art and science of golf course restoration. From East Lake to Oak Hill, Andrew shares how he blends historical vision with today's game, leveraging cutting-edge technology and timeless design principles to reshape how courses are played and remembered.
Well, Andrew, I want to thank you very much for spending a few minutes with me to have a conversation. And I'm always fascinated by stories. I love to hear people's stories. And as I've developed a relationship with you over the last few years, albeit, in your shadow, I've grown to learn that you have started to grow a significant reputation in the golf industry, in particular, your restoration and even some of your new designs out there. And, you can say that, you were at Oak Hill, their East Course, Congressional Blue Course. You just completed East Lake, which was a fabulous on TV, and you've got many more opportunities, out there. And I'm just excited to have this conversation with you today. So, what I really kind of see is that you're restoring legacies out there, and by doing that, you're bringing the modern game to these courses that most of us even dream of. And as I followed your reputation out there, we've had the pleasure of coming in behind you and scanning your greens, and I'm just absolutely thrilled to basically see what you've done with these historic marvels out there. So, if you wouldn't mind, just kind of introduce, how did you get into, architecture, the golf course design, restoration in particular? Just share some nuggets with us.
Sure. Well, thanks, John, for having me. What an honor to be able to spend some time with you, and appreciate all your help over the years. You and your company are really providing a wonderful service to the game of golf. So as a junior in high school, this is what I wanted to do. And anybody I ever spoke with about it were like, there's a handful of architects that practice at a high level in the United States. And Andrew, we've seen your golf game. You're not that good. And, you don't come from a famous golfing family. So it's going to be a tall task. And the more people told me I couldn't do it, the more I doubled down and worked harder. And I went to Virginia Tech. The folks there really embraced the idea of me pursuing this direction. They wanted me to keep a very open mind to the greater college experience and all the things that the programs I've studied within, which were landscape architecture and turfgrass management. I have a degree in both. But each side of the fence there really embraced this. They encouraged me and helped me. But they also said, hey, you really need to pay attention to the other things that are possible, because it is a very narrow field, and you need options if something goes astray. And when I left college in around 2000, 2001, and went to work for McDonald and Sons Golf Course Builders out of Maryland, Chip McDonald, what a treasure, another treasure to the game of golf. They'd done a lot of work in renovation and restoration, and he allowed me to be what we had as a design associate, where I was designing and building stuff in part from the seat of a dozer, but in part learning the entire process. And I spent 14 years honing my craft, working alongside him. And man, I learned a lot. I learned the value of every line you draw on a piece of paper. It's kind of important, that you can build or draw something that you can build. And then how to manage a budget, how to manage a timeline, and how to get results that are sustainable. I never spent a day working for a modern architect, which is kind of crazy.
Wow.
I really just learned it as I went. A lot of, surround myself with a lot of amazing people with a lot of great experience. But most of the architecture that I draw my experience from is really by reading all the old guys. So, Donald Ross and George Thomas and William Flynn, Mackenzie, Tillinghast, those are really my mentors by studying their work. And that obviously kind of led to being able to do some restoration efforts of their work. And I would just say that I think my main traction in the renovation and restoration world was taking a historic property, understanding how it had changed over time, why it had changed over time, and the merits of the original design versus the modern game, and how to marry those two together.
Well, that sounds like an awesome journey there. So explain to me how you came about that. It's really easy to see a property, but how do you put that in your head? How do you leverage technology? What do you see? Because the game has really changed on all aspects from a player's perspective to the agronomic side, that whole collision of what's going on. And how do you bring what the vision of the original architect had in mind and marry that with the modern game today?
I think, one element of technology we've really embraced is obviously the archive of historical information that's at your fingertips on the web and all these different databases.
Right.
The ability to pull up historical aerials, look for hidden places for historic information, whether it be the Library of Congress, a number of different small archives, newspaper articles, in the margins of things, you wouldn't even expect. We found historic documents in ad placement where you just wouldn't think it would be there, but all of a sudden there was an ad for a particular product and the golf course set off to the side. Those are some really interesting ways to at least collect historic information. When it comes to applying the modern game, certainly utilizing CAD technology and all the differing measuring tools that we have available to us. Everything from the laser, you hold in your hand as you're playing golf. And for me, as an architect, I use that thing every day, multiple times, shooting distances, looking at things from a little different perspective. Anytime we could apply original architectural intent with a change of maybe 100 yards of driving distance from the time a lot of these places were built, that's critical. If we can do it with tee placement, that's awesome because it leaves a lot of the other things intact if we have room to go back.
Right.
Otherwise, we're looking to kind of replicate or take the original design intent and move down the golf hole. So we've done that quite a bit. When it comes to greens, and I'm sure one of the things we're going to get to, anything I can do to respect the original design intent of the putting surfaces and their surrounds, that makes complete sense to me. Because for the most part, the game around the target hasn't changed. And the guys that did this work 100 years ago were so creative in using their green sites in interesting and unique ways. It's something we really try to embrace. So, when we think about the dynamics of your mapping abilities, boy, does it paint a picture of what's functional and what needs help. And, I've asked you often for not only the beautiful renderings that you provide with the different colors, which is very impactful, but also some of the contours and things that are just to the edges. Because when you take the scanning technology you utilize and we spread it out just a little wider than what's the current putting surface, often you can see hitches in the topography contour lines that show the original platform of the putting surface. And even if there's a change in grade of maybe 6 inches or a foot to this flatter area, we can start to understand that, hey, the original green was out here. The center of the green has become rounded and raised, but we know the green used to go back to this corner. How do we take that information and apply it? That's where some of the magic happens.
Well, that's awesome. So when you're out there working with your team, how do you integrate that with the superintendent? Because oftentimes, once you're done and completed, the superintendent is responsible for basically what I say, implementing your idea and how to restore back. What kind of care and what kind of conversation do you have with the staff as you leave the property? Say, here's what we felt the intent was, here's how we designed it, and how do you basically maximize the playability so somebody playing today has the same feeling that may have been played 80 or 100 years ago?
We start maybe on the front end, utilizing your technology to see where the whole locations were to begin with and where they are currently, and how many whole locations are missing because either an evolution to the surface itself over time or to green speeds. And one of the beautiful things about ezLocator is on the front end, It's a very graphic, easy way to show a club, a client, an owner, hey, this is what you got. You know intuitively every time you play on Wednesday, the full location's front right or back left. Well, there's the only two hole locations on the entire green. It's too much slope. But when you look at your scan and you start to see, okay, well, there's a little orange that's like a 4% or 5% here. That was probably a whole location back in the original design of the golf course. And depending on green speeds or adjustments to grade, that probably was a good one. Let's go get that. And so we often show your scan next to a proposed image of what we could get on the front end to then be able to tell our clients, look, this is what's possible. This is what you're missing. These are the exciting things that are out there. During the construction process, we use a very similar set of technology where we'll strip the grass off and we'll shape and put into practice a mocked up green surface. So exactly what the final putting surface will be, adjusted off of what's there. Anywhere that's good, green, as we say on your scans, we won't touch. Okay. We really want to leave those historically accurate. But where we are hunting for a corner that's missing or a front edge or a back or something, okay, we will go in and start to manipulate and buff the dirt until we get it where we like it. And once we feel like we have the right platform, we will utilize a robotic total station or some sort of LiDAR device to scan the dirt, similar to the way you do yours. And then we evaluate that before we build the green to make sure that at the end, we're going to have something that works well. After we build everything and put grass on it, then we love to have you back as kind of a proof of concept or a proof that we've achieved what we were striving for. And one of the things that I think is so valuable with your service, either on an existing golf course or a renovated one, is to show the wealth of variety that's possible on a green. Sometimes clubs get really kind of pinched in on, we're only going to use this space and this space, but your data shows, the world is possible. So we love that about it. It also really allows a golf course to be played day in and day out with a lot of fun.
So with the modern game, with green speeds being, most people 11, 12 or beyond, the original architects, their green speeds were probably, 4, 5, 6, 7, something like that. I have a USGA picture from 1977. The Augusta National was 7.5 back then. Oakmont was 9. And you look at what you're having to deal with today. How do you accommodate, that same, if I went back in time 100 years ago and said, hey, that's what that green looks like. How do you accommodate that faster green speed? Because some of the slope that may have been there before may have to be softened. What are your techniques? How do you manage that? Because I'm thoroughly impressed when, we get to see, what it was before and we get to see the finished product and I go, wow, before it may have been 15, 20% in the 0 to 3% slope. And now you're talking 40, 50, 60%. And it's just awesome. Everybody I talk to, I just am simply amazed at the options that you give, a facility to basically maximize the puttable surface, leverage technology so that they get a variety of play, create a tournament-like feel every day. And members are saying, wow, I never saw that pin there before. So
yeah, it's awesome. Well, we've done it a couple different ways. We've been able to utilize technology by taking your original scan data and put a pivot point somewhere in the green surface and actually adjust the whole thing in a kind of a ratio to try to leave the concept of, hey, here's a quick spot, here's a flat spot, here's another flat spot, and just tilt the whole putting surface and do that in CAD. It's a click of the finger, and you can then see kind of what each degree of pitch as you change what happens to the overall surface when you do that. The one challenge with that, though, is that often these greens with severe slopes rest in landscape positions that are cumbersome. meaning they either sit at a top of a hill or in some sort of hillside or landform. And when you start to really tweak them, the front can become very abrupt, or the back could lower and cut into the slope in the back, and it causes a real concern for maintenance and playability, especially where we have, a lot of golfers that have a lower ball flight and want to run the ball in. There's a few of us out there. When you pick up the front, the ball doesn't want to bounce in. It wants to arrest or roll back. And that becomes really troublesome. So what we'd prefer to do is push down the back if we can, because it leaves the front very graceful. If you run into rock or some other reason that the old guys put it like that, that gets tough. So another trick that we often use is we look for the steeper transition slopes in a putting surface where, say, you're flat and it's kind of steep and then it tries to flatten out, but maybe the two flat parts aren't flat enough. What we do in that situation is we really try to leave the transition slope intact, and we'll work the front, back, whatever the corners, and get them more usable. In doing that, it leaves the final product in a very graceful state. Instead of taking the transition and making it harsher, diving when you come in the front into the bottom of the slope, if you drive that grade in, the bottom gets steeper. If you pull the top part up to get more usable space on the top, it gets steeper. Then all of a sudden, you're looking for the clown's mouth. So leaving that center section intact has really been a good trick for us. Hopefully my contemporaries don't steal that from me too much, but if it helps them, so be it.
Well, it's awesome. It's a challenge that I admire everybody out there that is trying to restore what the game used to be. And this week the PGA Tour pros are playing Philadelphia Cricket Club, which happens to be another ezLocator customer, the Wissahickon course. And I remember talking to Dan Mearsman maybe 10 years ago when they redesigned that. And the concept that you talked about, very similar. They wanted to basically keep the contours as much as possible, so they had to adjust the front and the back. And I found that quite fascinating back then at that time. So I really kind of find it fascinating. So let me ask a question. You're in a greens committee, and you know how greens committees can be, and the members saying, hey, we want to play this golf course the way it was designed originally 80, 100 years ago. Explain to me how you handle that kind of a question, because there's so much that changes. A golf course is a living, breathing, dynamic organism that changes over time. With today's agronomics, we're putting top dressing on top of top dressing, and people think the sprinklers are sinking. They're actually, the dirt around is rising. So, explain to me how you have that conversation with, a greens chairman or somebody that says, we got to keep this course the way it was originally designed.
Yeah, with fairway bunkers, I'm more apt to move them than to add. So some folks would say, hey, the original bunkers are 220 yards off the tee, and we're hitting at 260, 275, 300. We'll leave the ones at 220, and we'll add another set at 300. I struggle with that because we're just adding more maintenance, and we're really handcuffing the short player that those short bunkers are now really in play for, and the better players bombing it over. If we shift them down, we widen the short landing zone, which makes the higher handicap player have a little more room to enjoy the game. So that's something that we often talk about. Anytime I can find an image of the putting surfaces early in the golf course's life, hopefully from the ground or a slightly elevated position, I can put that beside an image of the current green and pretty quickly be able to showcase how much a green has evolved over time. We do that quite a bit, and it really helps take away the idea that it's my opinion that it was once this way. It's pretty clear, hey, it was that way. If you want to have an interesting discussion with golf course aficionados, talk about the greens at Pinehurst, number 2.
Right.
And whether they were originally designed that way or not. I'm not touching that third rail today. But it's definitely a similar conversation of what you have with the Greens Committee, because you'll have somebody that's been a member for 60 years and say, "Oh, it was always this way," and then you can show, well, it really wasn't. It was this way.
Right.
So
Sure.
a little bit of tact, a little bit of grace, and any evidence you can point to that's not opinion based is always helpful.
Well, what it sounds like to me is you're leveraging technology as much as possible to basically support, your design philosophy. And I've always tried to say, use ezLocator to basically give you as much information as possible before you put a shovel in the ground. Coming from the technology space, it's much easier to make mistakes and do your design work on a computer before you have to put a shovel in the ground. So it sounds like to me you've embraced that approach, and not only in your restorations, but I'd like to understand more, from the original work that you're starting to do. Share us a little bit how the things that you've learned over the years, and what are you trying to create in the future?
I think if you've utilized technology and seen the results in the field, it starts to become, this incredible tool that you shouldn't be afraid of. You should most definitely embrace.
Mm-hmm.
In drawing in CAD, I was working on a project this morning, pretty important one, and I had a bunker that I wanted to just twist its position slightly. And so being able to click on the bunker and click on rotate and twist that bunker and then move it, 10 feet, I didn't have to erase it and redraw it. I just had to shift. Okay. So a very easy way to show how just technology, there's a real benefit to that versus the warmth of drawing on a piece of paper, which I get. But the other ways, the iPad that I'm talking to you on today is probably one of my most valuable tools. I carry it with me everywhere I go, every site visit, and I can take a picture and I can draw what I'm seeing in my eye to a group of people that I'm standing with. I can take a picture of a mound of dirt and draw what I want and show it to the shaper that's operating the bulldozer.
Uh-huh.
And then I can take this, and our plans are all in GPS that are on our tablets, and we can walk in our plan from the minute it's designed to the minute it's built.
Wow.
And so we can make adjustments in the design process by real time standing where a bunker is supposed to go.
Mm-hmm.
We can make an adjustment in the field when we're building it to make sure that the feature is of an appropriate size and in the right location. I don't know what I would do without it. When I started doing golf course design, one of my first tasks was to lay out work. And so we'd have a 1 inch to 100 plan, and I'd have a scale, and I'd measure every 100 feet, we'd put a stake. And then I'd measure left and right. If a bunker was right 66 feet, I'd measure over 66 feet, and I'd write it on a stake. And then the right side is 100 feet. I'd write 100 feet. And then I'd go with a tape and have to pull over to find the location of this bunker. I just walk out there and it's like, I'm on it right here. Why would you not embrace that? It's so valuable. And one of the big things we do talk about, though, is we want to take the plan we designed and utilize technology. We put it on the ground in the field, and then whatever the field and the dirt tells us, we'll tweak it to get better.
Right.
But man, what a tool.
So how much, you have the idea, you've designed it, using technology, you get out there, start moving dirt, and it's almost like the remodeling shows you see, all of a sudden you go, uh-oh, we've got a problem. How many of those do you encounter? Is it, and obviously every problem can be solved with time and money, but how do you identify that? I'm sure every course, you probably got a wealth of stories to talk about that.
Those things happen at times. It's certainly something you said earlier. The idea of designing on a piece of paper and working through potential issues on paper is always the best. You're always going to be in a better position working through as much of that ahead of time as possible. We're working on a current project where we're trying to fit in a performance center into a landform. And so we're trying to make sure that from the hitting bays, we can accomplish a certain sight line, and from the driving range tee where everybody else is going to be hitting, that we have a shared line or as good or better. And so now all of a sudden we're working on grades of where we're hitting from. We're working on grades of where we're hitting to. being able to try to figure that out and utilizing technology, being able to draw sight lines quickly. Um, yeah, I mean, another really valuable tool of working through a problem in the field. For the most part, I love to think about golf course design totally different from building a parking lot or a road or um, anything that's hard and fast, right? The dirt, it's just dirt,
You're right.
right? As long as we can make it drain and as long as we can create something fun to play on, a happy accident. I've got a little figurine of Bob Ross here. He's one of my favorite inspirational figures. Happy accident, no problem. We'll figure it out. You know. Anyways,
Well, that's awesome. Well, it sounds like to me you enjoy what you're doing. You're having a lot of fun. You get to meet a lot of different people. What I'm seeing, the evolution of the game is how do we be more inclusive? I think the game has changed in the last 15, 20 years. You're seeing, I think COVID attributed to a lot of that, where families started to embrace it. Memberships are at an all-time high, and it becomes now a lifestyle for a lot of families. And what are you seeing, from a trend of your designs, of the growth in the industry? How do we basically turn that 6-hour round into a 4-hour round? But more importantly, what are the other options out there that you see for facilities to basically be more inclusive, to start, people at a younger age, and make them, not have to suffer through a 6-hour round as a child, an 8-year-old, get their attention. So what are you seeing out there?
there's a ton of different things coming to us. Certainly the growth of practice facilities at clubs, the ability to go there and spend an hour or two engaging with the game of golf and not committing 4 hours to playing. That's been huge. Great advances in short game areas, putting courses, big putting greens. Again, things that allow you to touch the game of golf without a huge commitment of time, and also to be able to learn the game. We're seeing a number of short courses or facilities that allow you to play a loop of golf holes in a shorter fashion. I get a little nervous of getting too far in on that with certain clients because it works great at the Cradle at Pinehurst because you're there, you played around a golf, you're looking for something else to do, fill a little time. It's wonderful. And you got such a concentration of energy and activity and things there. When you're talking about building a little 9-hole par 3 and it's, a 10-minute cart ride at the other side of the facility, and it's hard to be able to wrangle juniors on, something so remote, I start to get a little hesitant. We really need to think about the program of how is it going to work. For most clubs, any way you can get those kinds of facilities close to your main social hub, it's important. So you just have to be thoughtful of some of that. When it comes to the game of golf, in particular, forward tees have been the greatest advance. Lady players have been the most impacted by poor golf design decisions in the game of golf. Forward tees were just put them up there. I don't care. I just don't want to see where the tee is, and put them over next to the cart path. And those tees are often right in front of bunkers, awful angles of play into a fairway. The topo leans away from them. I mean, there's so many things that I see for forward tees that used to be designed just up there somewhere. And when you start to really put some yardages to it, if you think about a player that hits it 125, 150 yards or less, providing good options for them to enjoy the game the way it's meant to be played, I think that's been huge.
And I've seen that happen too. I'd laugh and smile because I've seen that same thing. Let's put the women's tees off to the side somewhere, on the right side, so that when they hit their nice little slice, they're still on the right side of the course, and not making it strategic for them to enjoy the game. So I think there's been an evolution of that, and I'm really, really happy because to me, I think that's the long-term success of the game. We can all marvel at Scotty Scheffler shooting 31 under it, and that's not an easy golf course. It's long. Obviously they can tighten it up, but you take any amateur out there, and they're definitely not breaking 80 too often out there. But it's one thing to look at the pros game, and the other is, are we developing it for the amateur game, and how do we make it fun? And so I really look at that. So in reflection, kind of taking a look at where have you been? It sounds like to me your early designs were, pencil and paper and, a little ruler here and a little ruler there. I'm sure when you were at Virginia Tech, they told you all about the latest and greatest technology at your hands. So you had to learn on the job, which is really kind of fascinating. Me coming from the technology space, I wouldn't have my business if it wasn't for the internet. And nobody told me about it when I was in college. So, I was busy using a slide rule. So help me understand, kind of your legacy. You've built a great reputation as far as, everybody I talk to from a restoration standpoint, from a great guy. I was at Vaquero a couple of months ago, one of your latest renovations. I didn't recognize the course, but I said, wow, this is fabulous. And I know you've got, I believe, Lakewood Country Club in Dallas on the books, and hopefully our paths will cross there. I've got an in there. My middle son is there, and hopefully you get to meet him. He's a great guy, great player, and stuff like that. But what do you see kind of as your legacy? What, when somebody talks about Andrew Green 50, 80 years from now, what do you think that they'll be talking about?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know. I guess that I try to approach the work, really humbly and with a great deal of reverence for these places I'm able to participate in. And I know that I'm redoing some work that folks that have, come before me have done. And so there is a natural evolution to the game. And I imagine, there'll be folks that come along and change some of the things I'm doing now. I totally get it. But I hope that people would at least understand the decisions that I've made over time, why I've implemented the things I have, and that I've just tried to be a great steward for the game and allow people to play these historic places and feel like they're part of the amazing history of the game of golf, and make some lifelong memories with whoever they're playing with. One of my favorite things to hear is when I go back to a course I've worked on that people talk about, which hole is the best or their favorite. And, I'm not a signature hole kind of guy.
Mm-hmm.
So I love it when there's, 6 or 8 holes on a property that people have strong emotional feelings about. That's a huge win for me.
Awesome. Well, Andrew, I really appreciate your time today. What I remember is basically you're teaching people where the game has come from and you're showing us where it's going to be in the future, and you're merging the two together, and that's a special talent. And I wish you all the success in your business, and I hope to be following you around the country more often and getting to know you a lot better. Again, thank you for your time today.